When people ask me, what do you think about AI? I think it is the most significant lever we can pull on in our lifetime to create economic value for our organization. It was March 2016, right before March Madness, but it wasn't March Madness. It was at the Four Seasons in Seoul, Korea. It was Go Madness. This is the DeepMind Match Challenge. This is Google DeepMind. And they had developed a machine learning program to compete against the 9-dan champion of Go. Now, for those of you that don't know, Go is an incredibly complicated game. Go does to chess what chess does to checkers. With chess, the first move, you got 20 possibilities. With Go, you've got 300. When you do the back of the envelope, it was one of the harder challenges in artificial intelligence. They had beaten a European champion, but he was kind of a hack. So they said, let's take on the Tiger Woods of Go. Let's take on Lee. And he predicted famously, yeah, I'll take your 150 grand for the challenge. I'll beat you 5-0. And everybody knew that it was at least 5 years away, probably 10 years away in most data science community. But something magic happened. And if you haven't seen the documentary, here's a QR code to it on YouTube. It's free. It'll blow your mind. Move 37 of game number 2 blew the greatest Go player alive's mind. It was a move no human being would ever make. And it was a move no data scientist thought a machine would ever make. And the plane, as they say, landed early. And it's always going to land early. Everything seems to happen ahead of schedule. Agentic is happening ahead of schedule. If I talk to you next year, I'm going to tell you quantum computing and its impact on software is going to happen ahead of schedule. What does this mean? It means that everybody in this room should have an intense curiosity to reach that peak of understanding about the basics of artificial intelligence, its economic impact, how we can explain it to people that we work with, and how we can achieve what I call learning effects. You might have heard of network effects, but when it comes to technologies like AI that create that fear factor, as we learn the first thing and they try to catch up with us, we're already on to playing Go. I'm telling you, I think agentic is going to be a very big deal by next year for a lot of businesses, whether you attach to a platform like a Salesforce or like a Microsoft or like an Oracle, many players are there, HubSpot's there, or whether you decide to build your own agentic solution. I believe we'll look back at ChatGPT as the picks and shovels of the AI revolution, where it created more work for you than it did solve things for you. Because the idea of that is exciting. I'm super passionate about agentic AI. I have been since 2022. I'm just so excited about that great leap from supervised to unsupervised and everything in between. And researchers are just saying, hey, agentic is the future, because when you think about it, we've moved from prediction to suggestion, but with agentic, we now have execution, and that is seismically more impactful on the velocity of a business. The most important thing about AI to me is that for the first time in history, we have decoupled prediction from judgment, which used to live in an expert who would say, based on my 40 years of being in business and my gray hair, I predict you should do this, and I pass judgment that you will do that. In other words, in a single moment, an expert prescribed. But the problem with experts is they're expensive and they're on, as we like to say in football terms, expiring contracts. And their expertise becomes obsolete long before everyone knows their expertise is obsolete. And so the beauty of artificial intelligence is that when you decouple prediction from judgment, the machine makes the prediction to scale and the human being passes judgment. MIT professor John Horton talked to me about this. He says, Tim, in 5 years, we will declare this the Rick Rubin economy. If you notice, Rick doesn't even have his hands on the faders. Rick doesn't play an instrument, never went to engineering school, but what has Rick got? He's got judgment. First time he heard Beastie Boys as a frat band, he knew there was something there. Convinced them, even though they were great musicians, rap was going to be their thing. Championed Public Enemy, made the Red Hot Chili Peppers' best record, put Johnny Cash back in his seat before his passing with arguably his best record ever. Rick could listen to something and figure out what to subtract to help it reach the listener, and that's a judgment. And I want you to think about how you recruit people into your organization that have judgment, because here's the problem. In the last couple of layoff years we've experienced as we keep waiting for this recession that hadn't happened yet, We let go of a bunch of people that we ask, what did they do? And we kept a bunch of experts with technical skills, and we let a bunch of Rick Rubins go on the street. So I think we have to reorient ourselves to find people that have a sense of taste, have a sense of acumen, have a sense of decisiveness, and those are the most important people. Finally, return on AI. Show me the money. Now this is one I've had to spend a lot of time interviewing chief financial officers, especially ones that are owned by private equity. And it's really interesting. They have attitudes and opinions about artificial intelligence. And by the way, they're not right, they're not wrong. They are the culture of the buying organization, so you need to align to them. If you either are trying to convince your organization to invest in artificial intelligence, or you sell artificial intelligence and you're trying to help the customer see the value, there's really 4 things you have to think about. If you want AI to pay you back, the first thing you have to do is start with the problem and not the technology. Number 1. When I go do on-site strategy days with companies about AI, it's always the business team, never the tech team. We start with the business team. We identify business challenges that have a material impact on either the valuation, the P&L, or the value creation plan. And then we do what's called a work back to identify, is it a culture problem, a production problem, a market problem, or a prediction problem? If it's a prediction problem, then it's AI addressable. If it's AI addressable, at that point you begin ecosystem research, but not before that. See, the problem is sometimes what happens in an organization is they get excited about a type of technology, and it has to go finding a job once you buy it in your organization. Or worse, you go to technology and say, what should we do about AI? And they start where their data is the best or their partners are the most ingrained and installed. So if you start with the business problem and work backwards, you'll have a natural connection to real business metrics they care about. So for example, if any of you have worked with a chief financial officer on go-to-market investment, like investing in sales or marketing, there's a metric they always use, and it's a challenge. It's called lifetime value customer acquisition cost, or better known as LTV CAC. And there's a ratio for it. And when LTV CAC's around 2 to 1, they're breaking even. 2.5 to 1, pretty good business partner. If the LTV CAC gets above 3 to 1, I'll buy all they've got. So I believe that if you start with the problem and work backward as an AI provider or as an investor in AI, you peer to a real metric they care about like that. Collaboration is the only way to solve really big problems in an organization. The lone genius is a myth. There is no singular lone genius that's done anything. In fact, all of the great solutions I've ever seen in my career were created not just by 2 people or 3 people working together, but surprising teams working together to change the world. And it's not just a sense of collaboration. What we're talking about here is disruptive collaboration. This is the idea. As a leader, you take your courage and you convince yourself to disrupt the current set of conversations going on at your company. To create a team, and I want you to ask yourself, who has a stake in the outcome? And then when you get the answer, ask the question again. Who has a stake in the outcome that's never at the table? Then once you get that answer, I want you to say, who has a stake in the outcome who is forbidden to be at this table? Because I'll tell you something, real solutions in this world come from unholy alliances, surprising conversations, uncomfortable partnerships where you as a leader grow into your shoes by taking everyone in the room from meism to weism. Here's a study, and I love this study because this will solve a key problem in your life: meetings. Meetings are the root canals of corporate careers. They're horrible. They're an hour, they're 2 hours long, and what do they usually end with? Well, that was great. Let's have another meeting in 2 more weeks and do this again, right? That's the results of the average meeting. At Deeper Media, we study this. Here's what we learned. On the average, when you put together a meeting, and it's an average of 90 minutes long, and you just have your group, your silo dwellers as I call them, you usually walk out of the room with the next play and agreement to do work on it 20% of the time. The other 80% of the time, it's an excruciating process that leads to another meeting, or as I like to call it, half a root canal, okay? What our research says in 186 use cases is that when you bring a second perspective into the room, sales plus marketing, you increase your chance by 50% that you walk out of the room with the next play. Because people with different perspectives, they have a different story they tell themselves about what works. They have a different set of constraints about what will never work. They have a different set of best practices. And let me tell you something, you and your company don't become obsolete. You don't get disrupted because of what you're thinking is out of fashion. You get upended because the constraints that you're living under change. Now you can do it. All the best practices you've lived on don't work anymore because we moved to the cloud. Everything changes, and as you increase perspectives, you increase the speed at which you solve problems. We found in the research that when you bring in a third perspective, say sales, marketing, and operations, it goes up 100%. Now instead of walking out of the room 20% of the time with the solution, it's 40% now. But here's the idea, it's like the Beatles, the number is 4. You gotta have Ringo, even though he has an idea for a song. But anyway, you gotta have 4. So think of it as sales and marketing and operations. And if you're a bunch of old geezers, bring in a millennial. And that perspective will blow your mind. You got 4 now. We've learned that you walk out of the room over 80% of the time with the next play and commitment to work. Because the wider you go, the faster you solve. When people are alone, they are frightened in the face of adversity. But when they collaborate with other people, they're a team. And it changes their sense of courage. And it's important for you to show the courage to convince people to create what I call collaborative webs. Not just meetings in the silo where you compare notes and patch the status quo and preserve the way things are. I mean collaborative webs that go widely across the enterprise. Talking to the land of no, engaging with the world of slow, doing deals with competimates. The most courageous thing you express as a leader is the idea that you tell your people when you get stuck, I want you to go wide. Don't tell them to think outside of the box. Tell them to solve outside of the lines. Now, when people talk to me, they say, so what you're saying is break down the silos. And I got to take a second. I was talking to Rachel about this, last night. Folks, please stop using grain elevators in your silos analogy, because that's not what they are. You can't knock down a silo. That is, I got to tell you, that's really naive. It can't be done, okay? Do you know why there's silos, which, by the way, are underground, built to hold missiles from attack from the out? Do you know why you build them? 2 things. Budgets and objectives. As long as you give a human being a budget and an objective that's going to be measured, they will build a silo. Here's my promise. When you encourage your people to create these webs, what they do is they build underground tunnels between the silos. When I see truly remarkable organizations today in 2017, and I've studied many of them, Salesforce is a good one, Tesla is a good one, Wegmans is a good one, SAS Institute is a good one. This is what they figured out. One problem at a time, courageous leaders have fostered disruptive, collaborative webs, and they've connected the groups together and created an organization driven around a common shared vision. I'm telling you, this is a once-in-a-career opportunity to wreck the status quo. We got to redesign the workplace, which will enable us emotionally and mentally to redesign the workflow. And then finally, it will enable us and motivate us to build a virtual talent bench and redesign the workforce. I consider it the heart and soul of winning. We've been talking about future of work since the 70s. Remember, it's first it was skylighting. I don't know if you remember this, but there used to be this idea that if you created skylighting, people would never leave your company because they don't want to work in the dark. There was that discussion. And then there's ergonomics. And then there was open office as an antidote to prairie dogs working in cube farms. But the point is, all of those discussions were tactical, really working around the idea of incremental productivity. But when we discuss remote work or distributed teams or work from anywhere, it is now a strategic conversation. It is about retention. It is about delivering the work and engagement So I don't think we should even call this stuff the future of work anymore. This is the future of winning. 6% of people worked remote before 2019. 25% of people work remote today. But according to Upwork economic research, in 2025, 20% will still be working remote. And this is a telling figure, because if the number's that high, what it means is if you don't embrace remote work, your replacement in the market will. Very few employees are actually hired to run a project or a program. Most projects and programs are run by the favor economy, the matrix, teamwork, depending on others with full-time jobs to do the knitting required to deliver the final thing. I want to talk about why the workflow is poorly designed for both our operations staff as well as the projects that we run and rely on. 2 out of 3 projects fail. Why? What happens is you start a project, you get your funding, you delegate a lot of work out of the room to other people with operational roles. You hope and you pray, and you miss your deadline. That's not how every organization does it. So what I recommend is a new canvas for doing project work. It's really simple. Take a project has a deliverable, which is usually the business case for approval and funding, right? So when you have the deliverable, what do? You break it down in components, or as some people call it, taskify that deliverable. And you break the deliverable down into all the discrete tasks, and you go through a mental model just like the folks at CompuVision do, just like our clients at Flexera do. They say, task 1, Upwork it, automate it. Can't do either, find a team member. Task 2, task 3, task 4, and before you know it, you've eliminated the number one dependency in front of you of making your deadline, and that's someone to do the work. Because when you use this human cloud as part of the design process upstream at the beginning of the process, you know what you do? You dramatically improve your chance of success. The ultimate Rand redesign comes down to redesigning the workforce. Full-time first has been a mental model for 100 years. That's how we've thought about talent. That's why they call it talent acquisition. In fact, the word work was first used by Gaspar Gustave Coriolis, a 19th century mathematician scientist who was obsessed with billiards. And he used the word work to describe the force that was required to move a ball. Good work was used to describe getting the ball in a pocket. So why do we conflate workforce with full-time talent? It's nothing to do with that, is it? It's about what? The force to move the ball to a certain location. Researchers looked at 400 companies on the journey of digital. You know what they found out? The number one reason companies don't reach digital transformation goals is they don't have access to enough talent to stand up the thousands of projects involved, okay? They believe that if you're going to ensure access to the type of skill set you need to recognize on-demand talent markets as strategic, the heart of the digital transformation motion, not something that's tactical. Where the work is being done is changing. How the work is being done is changing. Every single person at your company may not agree on wrecking the status quo, but I think every single person at the company that you want to keep agrees that business success is a win for everyone, including our customers and our partners and the world.